Hello folks, I'm Alex. This is Alex Unabridged, and this is my Cryptid Readathon wrap-up. So welcome back to the channel if that is the case. Yes, so November was the Cryptid Readathon event, hosted by Jason at Jason's Weird Reads, Sin at Sin's Book Nook, and by Crystal at Fibre Artsy, I believe. And yes, this was a readathon reading all about different cryptids. There were 5 prompts, and I did manage to get through 5 books for those prompts, which I was quite pleased about. So let's dive straight in and find out what I read and whether it was any good. So the first prompt then was read a book about your favourite cryptid. My favourite, I think, has probably got to be the Yeti. And so I read a book called The Yeti, a novel by Rick Chesler and Jack Douglas. This was a Kindle Unlimited pick, this one. So this follows the story of Dr. Zach Hitchens, who's an evolutionary biologist who we meet just as he finds out that his wife has been killed in a car accident. He and his wife were meant to be going to Everest for a summit bid with a team, and he is convinced by a colleague to still go, at least to Nepal, and speak to the team and take his wife's ashes to Everest, basically. And he's very reluctant. He decides to start with, he's only going to go as far as Kathmandu, then he kind of gets talked into going as far as base camp, and then when he gets to base camp, he decides that he's gonna go and try and get as far up the mountain as he can. As they make their way to base camp, they come across villages and towns, as you do on the trek, but strange things have been happening. Herds of yak have been kind of decimated, and you know, a body has been found in the woods that's obviously been attacked, that's been kind of mutilated. And so there's this strange superstition surrounding the area, and you know, there's something out there. We know there's something out there, and yes, it kind of progresses in that vein. So yeah, this one was a 3 out of 5 for me. This was quite entertaining in the most part. It was quite a good one in terms of a lot of the tension, the horror, things like that was actually nothing to do with the Yeti. It was to do with the kind of the horrors, I guess, of high altitude climbing, especially if you're not quite as confident as maybe you should be going up Everest, and you know, all the various things on the mountain that can, you know, get you, essentially the natural things. So you know, the crevasses in the Khumbu icefall, things like that, hypothermia, frostbite, all that kind of stuff, and just other members of your team who you might, you know, bump heads with, so to speak. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of tension and horror based around the climb, which I really like, because I like that kind of stuff. I've read a lot of non-fiction about Everest expeditions, K2 expeditions, generally high altitude stuff, and you know, sort of dangerous environments, and you know, I like, as I say, I like that kind of stuff. I like that kind of adventure. And so most of that, and most of it seemed to be, you know, kind of pretty factually, you know, accurate in terms of, from what I know anyway, of the non-fiction stuff. So you got that kind of is the most part of it, I would say. But there is obviously this storyline with the Yeti that kind of does tie in quite well. And it's like, you don't see a huge amount of the Yeti or get a huge amount of that kind of storyline. It's all very kind of an undercurrent until we get towards the end of the book. And that's where the book unfortunately kind of fell off for me. It was reasonably believable for the most part, even though some of it I was a bit like, not quite sure that'd happen, or that person would act in that way. But the last sort of quarter when the stakes really kind of got ramped up, and you know the Yeti came into kind of full force, I guess, in the latter part of the book. It just got a little bit too silly for me. Not the Yeti stuff particularly, but just in terms of the way that the human characters were acting, and also what they were capable of doing physically, mentally, in the death zone on Everest. And, you know, how they kind of made quite miraculous comebacks from near death. You know, at the 11th hour, you know, things like that. It's like it just got maybe a little bit too pushed, a bit too far in terms of credibility for me, but it didn't spoil the book at all. It's, you know, it was still a highly enjoyable, fun kind of read, and certainly for the most part, I kind of thought, oh yeah, this is really interesting. The fact that most of the tension's not coming from the Yeti stuff; it's coming from the mountain stuff. But as I say, it's just that last bit where it just kind of went bonkers a little bit, and I just kind of went, oh, that's a shame, because I think you know, had it maintained a certain level of believability. We are talking about a book about, you know, Yetis here, but had it maintained a bit more believability, I think it would have scored higher for me. But yes, but still enjoyable. It was, you know, it was part of my subscription, so I can't complain at all. I didn't spend any extra money on it. And yeah, I'd say I'd recommend it if you want a good, fun story involving high altitude mountaineering and all that kind of stuff, and a bit of Yeti action. But just, I think, be prepared for not so accurate representation of what's possible and not possible in the death zone of Everest. So, next one then is, the prompt was a cryptid you wouldn't want to meet alone in the dark, I think, something like that. I haven't got the prompts right in front of me. But which is pretty much all cryptids, really, isn't it? But this one I picked a Mothman story, and that was Below by Laurel Hightower. And this follows a woman called Addie, who is recently divorced, quite anxious, quite nervous about kind of being in the world on her own, surviving. Her ex-husband has kind of, over the years, sort of got into her head and made her feel like she's weak and she couldn't do anything without him. And he's still trying to do that, really, from, you know, sort of the other end of a phone. But she's trying to, like, you know, go and do something on her own, drive her way through the snowy mountains of West Virginia to meet it with some friends for a horror movie event. And she has a little bit of a scare on the road, so she pulls over into a truck stop and goes to a diner and kind of tries to calm down a bit, where she meets a trucker, and he seems like a really nice guy, and he offers to essentially escort her through over the roads, the snowy roads, the mountain passes, and he gives her a CB radio so that she can talk to him whilst he's in his cab and all of that. And so they set off together, but somewhere remote up in the mountains, on a mountain road, something very strange appears in the middle of the road, some strange creature, and the truck essentially swerves and goes off the side of a bridge and into a kind of a ravine below, and, you know, obviously crashes kind of into a bit of a cave, mouth of a cave, and Addie manages to, you know, stop her car even though the roads are icy. She gets out. She can't raise the trucker on the radio, but she knows that there seems to be no mobile signal in the area that she's in. She can't get through to anybody, so she decides that she's gonna go and try and get down into the ravine and check on him. And so we follow her basically from that point, you know, in terms of she's got to find her way down, she's got to get to the truck, she's got to go and see if he's alive, if he's, you know, savable, all that kind of thing. But whilst she's doing this, she's very aware of being watched, she's very aware of something else around her. And as the story progresses, those things get more and more creepy. And she starts to sort of question herself, what she's hearing, what she's seeing, the kind of the reality of you know, the space that she's in, the location, etc. And, you know, it's kind of, you know, about her kind of finding that she's stronger than she thinks she is. So yeah, so this one, I really enjoyed this one. This one it's a novella, so it's quite short, but it was very fast paced. It was, you know, it kept me, I think I read it in one sitting, in fact. It kind of kept me enthralled for that length of time. So this is a 4 out of 5. It's one I'd read again for sure. The character, because it's focused predominantly on just Addie, and it's told from Addie's perspective. It's third person, but it's, you know, it's her story essentially. You do get a good amount of character development actually in this. You do get the kind of the good character arc from somebody who doesn't believe that they're strong, who has kind of been conditioned to believe that they can't survive on their own. But it's certainly wanting to prove it, but he's still feeling that anxiety, still feeling that weakness, and he's still kind of hearing the voices of her ex-husband and the like in her head, kind of telling her this. You know, it's her arc from that to actually realising her own strength and realising that she can survive and that she's resourceful. So yeah, it does have good character development. There's a lot of, you know, we get to kind of get inside Addie's head quite well. The location setting for it is really good. It's, you know, you can picture it really well. You know, sort of from what I know of that region of the world, it feels accurate. And sort of, you know, the sort of inside the cave that the truckers crashed into, and what she finds down there, that's very atmospheric, that's quite creepy. Feels quite claustrophobic. So yeah, I definitely recommend this one. As I say, I would read this one again. I own this one. And yeah, if it as I say, it was a good one for one evening to sit down and just kind of rip through, because it was, you know, fast paced and thrilling and you know, kind of creepy, and just kept me engaged throughout. There was no lulls in this one whatsoever. Okay, then the next prompt was to read a book with a water-dwelling cryptid, and for that I picked The Loch by Steve Alten. Steve Alten being the author of The Meg, of course, or Meg, which I read back in July, I think, and loved for its ridiculousness. So I went into this hoping for some more Steve Alten bonkers storyline. So this follows Dr. Zachary Wallace, who is a marine biologist. He is part Scottish, part American. He spent the first 9 years of his life in Scotland, whilst his parents were still together, living near Loch Ness. And then his parents divorced because his dad is basically just a big git, and went back to the States, where during his teenage years he found that he was quite gifted academically and loved marine biology, so that's what he studied. When we meet him, he's about to go down in a submersible to try and get the first pictures of the giant squid. He's developed a lure to bring the squid close to the submarine, and to take pictures of it. He's got a cameraman with him. And they find the giant squid, but they also find something else, which I won't spoil. And there's a little bit of an accident, shall we say, in the submersible, and Zach ends up drowning, but gets, you know, resuscitated aboard the ship. And then his life basically goes to shit for a bit. And he ends up, you know, kind of without a job, without a fiance, and in a very bad place, because this accident has triggered off a hydrophobia and some night terrors that he doesn't know exactly what they're about yet, but he knows they might link back to his childhood. He ends up having to go back to Scotland, where his dad has been arrested for murder, from pushing somebody into Loch Ness, or like hitting somebody and then falling into Loch Ness. And his dad kind of calls him home to help, to give him support and to help him. And he ends up on this mission, on this kind of adventure, to try and prove the existence of a Loch Ness monster in order to help his dad escape the death penalty. Apparently the Scottish authorities in this book are considering bringing back the death penalty for Angus Wallace. So yes, and then we end up with an adventure surrounding a search for the Loch Ness monster. What is it? Does it exist? And if it does exist, what do you do about it? So yes, this is a 3 out of 5. It was enjoyable. It was bonkers. It's prime Steve Alten, really. I think that's probably what I can say. The character work was okay at best. Zach Wallace is decent enough. You do get some decent kind of character development with the main character. A lot of the others are very stereotyped. They're very kind of surface level. There's not a lot of character development there or complexity there. As I found in the Meg, his approach to female characters is abysmal. They are very one-dimensional, and none of those dimensions is ever, and whatever the dimension, it's not particularly positive. Even the characters that are meant to be kind of strong women kind of come off as not great. But I kind of expected that based on my experience with the Meg. The plot is quite convoluted, but it is bonkers batshit. And what do I expect from a Loch Ness Monster book? But it's amusingly so. That's the thing with Steve Alten, though. It's like, even though I have some issues with character and with writing style as well, it's like the writing style can be a little bit kind of too in your face sometimes for me, or just not great. Dialogue's not great. That's not why I read it, because Alten knows how to write a really ridiculous but really fun plot. So yeah, the dialogue in this more, I think, was the thing that irritated me the most, because a lot of it is written it's written almost phonetically in a Scottish accent, and a very stereotyped Scottish accent. It just gets a bit much. It's just a bit overdone for me. But yeah, I can kind of see, I see why he did it, but it gives it flavour to start with, but then it just, as I say, it just becomes a bit over the top for me. But yeah, the plot, I mean, I read these for the plot. I read these for the plot. And although the plot was a little bit convoluted at times, it worked in terms of it didn't really lose me in terms of any kind of pace issues at any point. There was a couple of lulls in it where I was a bit like, come on Steve, come on. But they were fleeting, really. There's some interesting kind of riffs, if you like, or interesting references to some Scottish history. There is a lot of Scottish history in this. Quite how accurate it is, I don't know, because my knowledge of Scottish history is not brilliant. But there's references. I mean, Zachary Wallace is a direct descendant of William Wallace. And there's a lot of reference to people like William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, Braveheart, the clans of Scotland. There's a lot of stuff about, there's quite a decent bit about sort of some of the history, the wars with England, and the kind of the how England and Scotland became united, but there's the conflicts and all that kind of stuff. So that all plays into it a bit, in the Scottish clans, and then you've got some more kind of esoteric stuff coming in, like the Templars and Arks of the Covenant and stuff like that. It's Holy Grails type stuff. So yeah, you've got kind of a mix of stuff. But it's quite interesting. It's quite nice to see that worked into a novel. It's quite interesting to see that take on it. It's one of those where I knew it by the end of it, I was going to be laughing at it in terms of its ridiculousness about where it went. But it was still highly enjoyable. So yeah, it's a 3 out of 5. I don't know whether I'd read this one again, whereas I probably would read the Meg again. But I'd still recommend it if you just want a really good kind of silly read, but just go into it knowing that it's not going to be the best character work. Okay then, next prompt was to read a book with a forest-dwelling cryptid. So for this one I picked a Kindle Unlimited book, and that was The Bigfoot's Mate by Delaney Rain. So this is Bigfoot smut, gay Bigfoot smut. In this one we meet Ramsey Kay, who is an anthropologist, whose little plane has just crash landed in the middle of remote forest, I think somewhere over Pacific Northwest, that sort of area of the States. He was meant to be flying to meet someone who claimed to have new evidence of Bigfoot's existence. And Ramsey is, he's a legitimate scientist and academic, but he also has a soft spot for Bigfoot and really wants to find Bigfoot and prove to the world that Bigfoot does actually exist. Because he claims that he was rescued by a Bigfoot when he was a child, when he got lost in the woods once. And he wants to prove for once and for all that Bigfoot does exist. So his plane has crash landed, he's injured, can't get a signal, get any communications out, it's pissing it down with rain, and night's kind of coming on soon, so he decides to bunk down in the plane and wait it out, and then try and find a way to hobble his way out of the forest and to safety the next day. But lo and behold, a Bigfoot appears and scoops him up and takes him back to his cave, his nice little cave, his nice little shelter. And Ramsey discovers that Bigfoot is a lot more involved than he thought he might be. That he can work the land, for instance. He can cultivate the land and cultivate kind of crops and stuff. He can kind of make use of things that he finds in the local tip. He can make salves and medicines and things like that. And he can cook. He knows how to cook and use ingredients and spices and things like that. So Ramsey ends up staying with Bigfoot in his recuperation, and of course they start to fall in love, and it goes from there. So this one was a 3. This one is decent. It's a sweet little story, really. There isn't a huge amount for me to say about this. It's a very simple plot, but it works. It's sweet, it's funny, there's some good humour into it. Delaney Rain writes a very light-hearted kind of story, and it's got some nice characters in it. Nobody's a complete arse, really, in this. There are a few kind of little twists in this which are nice, and it's just kind of quite a heartwarming little story, really. The smut is it's not bad, but it's not good, is what I'd say. I kind of went, oh, okay. It was there. It wasn't as smutty and quite as spicy. As the smut wasn't as spicy, if that makes sense, as Delaney Rain's other book that I read back in August for Garb August, which was The Minotaur's Mate. That was a bit smuttier. Whereas this was sweeter. But as I say, it was a decent little book. It did quite well in terms of establishing kind of the world building of this sort of society that this is kind of set in, the version of our society that this is set in. And there is a second book in the series, so I guess that will build on that kind of world building. So, but it was good for what it was. It was an enjoyable little read. Again, it was another one sitting read, and it was a nice break from some of the horror stuff that I've been reading. Okay, and then finally, I've got one for the prompt, which was to read a book about a cryptid that's local to you. Local meaning, within your state, if you're in the States, or a drivable distance. And of course, in the UK, everywhere's drivable. So I went for as local to me as I possibly could. And the cryptid that I picked was one called Jenny Greenteeth, who is a kind of a water hag. Who lives in lakes and emerges and grabs people's ankles and pulls people in, children and old people often, and drowns them. So she's lovely. and she's usually described as having long, lank, dark hair and sharp teeth, and just, yeah, sounds quite creepy. So I found a book by an author called Simon Ian Cox, which is just called Greenteeth. So this follows 3 sort of 20-somethings, two women and a man, on the hunt for evidence of alien big cats. To start with, they have hired a very remote cabin by a lake surrounded by woods, and they are there on a kind of a funded research trip, essentially, to try and capture some alien big cats that have been sighted in the area by locals. So they are staying in this cabin. They go and set up cameras, and then obviously the cameras overnight hopefully pick things up. They find some weird stuff on the cameras, but not to do with alien big cats. And they learn some local history about the lake that the cabin's next to, which is a bit creepy. Yes, it all goes a little bit to hell. I won't give much away on this one because it's very short, and you know it would be easy to just give away the entire plot. But it's creepy. It's safe to say it's creepy. Yeah, it's a 3 out of 5. Again, it was decent. It was one where actually, and I don't often say this, I would have preferred it to be a little bit longer. I think, whilst the plot worked quite well in terms of the pacing, the lengths and stuff like that, I would have liked a little bit more, maybe, character development. I think maybe some of the reactions of the characters, some of the conversations, etc. with the characters, I would have liked a bit more backstory. There is some backstory in there to them, but I would have liked maybe a bit more. And it just felt sometimes like their reactions, there wasn't enough build to reactions to things. It was a bit too, quick. And it just felt slightly off. Not in a really bad way, but I just think, like, for me, this could have bumped itself up a little bit more in my rating if it had just had a little bit more development on it. But it's by no means bad. Cox has some really nice, like, phrasing, some really nice style to his writing, certainly in terms of when it comes to writing about the environment, about the setting, the way that he actually evokes that sense of place and the kind of the creepiness, the claustrophobia, the remoteness, that kind of thing, the temperature, all that kind of stuff is really good. Like, he's got quite a lot of really nice bits of writing in there. Dialogue's not too bad. As I say, the characters I think is what could do with a little bit more development for me. But that's a personal thing as well. It's like I like better developed characters. But yeah, I wouldn't have had an issue if this was like a bit longer, as I say, and it was just developed a bit further. I would quite happily read something by Simon Ian Cox that's a bit of a bigger one. So I will go back and look at what else he has written. Okay, so that's everything then for the Cryptid Readathon. Thank you very much for watching, folks. If you've read any of these, do let me know in the comments below. Likewise, if there's anything on here that you think you might try, based on having heard me ramble about it today, let me know that too. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider giving me a like and subscribing for more content coming very soon. But from me, for now, that's ta-ra.